I've lived in rural Massachusetts for 17 years of my life, and I've encountered a lot of wildlife in my time here. One day, I was moving my mare up toward another pasture, which was a little way down from my house, a good 15-minute walk. So, I tacked her up and we were making our way down the main road. The road is still very rural. Dense forest is on each side, and cars rarely drive on it. It's a perfect main road to horseback ride on, if I do say so myself. Well, all of a sudden, my mare wouldn't keep going. Annoyed, I dismounted and decided to lead her on foot to the pasture. We were making our way around a corner when I noticed my mare's gaze fixed on something. Less than 15 feet away from us was a large black bear, and as we made eye contact, my heart sank into my stomach. I was 16 years old at the time and barely weighed 100 pounds, and staring down something so large is unforgettable and one of the scariest things I've experienced. Not only do I have this thing's attention, but I have a whole damn horse with me, and I'm on the ground, not even on the horse. Maybe I didn't act the way I was supposed to, but I'm alive, so I'm not complaining. I slowly started walking backward with my mare, not wanting to risk anything. Adrenaline does weird things. After I re-rounded the corner and the bear was out of sight, I mounted the mare and made my way back to the house. I actually drove up with my car and managed to get a few blurry pictures of it. I've had weird and borderline paranormal encounters in the woods, but to my taste, nothing beats Mother Nature's creatures. This was about 11 years ago when I lived in southern Montana. We have coyotes and an occasional mountain lion sighting, but no bears. My house was just a bit outside of town, and the neighborhood made a large circle. We'd seen mountain lions on the cliffs behind our house and coyotes a couple of streets further back before. It was late summer or early fall, around 2 or 3 in the morning, when I decided to go for a walk, like I often did. Now there was this spot on my walk that was a large open lot that was a hill on a curved part of a road, so you couldn't see around it. On the other side of this area was a drained irrigation ditch. Now, this lot always gave me the creeps, and it wasn't just me. Everyone I talked to didn't like this area. I had just gotten to the area when the asphalt turned to gravel, and my flashlight went out. I heard a truck come barreling around the corner, and the person driving slammed on the brakes right in front of me. I thought it was a little weird since I was on the side of the road, but then I realized that he wasn't looking at me. I turned to look toward the irrigation ditch, and that's when I saw them. 3 large masses moved out from behind a tree. They had the ears and muzzle of a dog or wolf, but their bodies were muscular, and they were hunched and moved in a really odd fashion. They'd extend one claw forward, and then do like a hop-drag motion for the rest of their body to catch up. They all disappeared into the ditch. I looked back at the truck, and the guy stepped on the gas, kicking up rocks behind him as he sped off. I was left in the dark for a few moments, stunned, and then my flashlight flickered back on. It would have been faster for me to go home past the empty lot and irrigation ditch, but I sprinted the other way. A house from mine there was an alleyway that went back to some caves with large lilac bushes lining the alley. As I was running by the alley, I heard rustling. I got to my house and went to fling open the sliding glass door when I heard a low growl from behind me. I ran inside, shut the door, and shined the light into the bushes that the growl had come from. My light caught a reflection of eyes before it disappeared. I went back the next day. Based off the tree they'd come from behind, they were about 4 feet tall hunched, but where I saw the eyes would have placed them at about 7 feet. I didn't go walking at night after that. An ex-girlfriend of mine used to live on this small rural island in Minnesota called Gray Cloud Island. At one point, the island had had the highest concentration of Indian burial mounds in the county. There's a lot of history there, and at one time it was considered sacred. Across the street from my ex's mailbox was a long, overgrown gravel driveway blocked off by a rusty chain. On one of our early evening jaunts, we decided to step over the chain and make our way down the driveway, which was a good quarter of a mile long, if not more. The driveway opened up into a small clearing of sorts, in the center of which was all that remained of a home's foundation, then little more than a rectangular patch of concrete. The trees which ringed the clearing were sparse in some places, thicker in others, but even so, we could see a lot of the ground beyond the clearing. Trees, grass, humped ground, and nothing else. The ex-girlfriend had a blanket, which she spread out on a patch of concrete. We lay down together and talked for some space while listening to the sounds of the approaching nightfall. Dusk had just crept in, falling over everything like a cold black cloak, when we heard movement in the woods nearby. The stealth crackle of branches, the crunching of leaves. It was very close, much too close for comfort. From the sound of it, the animal was no more than 20 yards away. Surely we would have heard its approach from a ways off. At that point, I was convinced it was just an animal that had snuck up on us somehow, but the fact that we couldn't have heard it coming still gave me some pause. Either way, my ex and I got up as if by mutual unspoken agreement, and, in the newly fallen darkness, made our way to the driveway. That sound, the sound of something approaching from the woods, changed. Now it was in the clearing where we had been only moments before. As scared as I've ever been, I broke into a run that was immediately arrested by my girlfriend, who urgently whispered, "Don't run, it provokes chase." I did as she said, and together in silence we moved back down the driveway, moved as fast as we could without actually running. By the time we got to the street, the sounds were gone. "What was that?" I asked her. "I don't want to talk about it," she said, stone-faced. She was 100% Native American, and I knew that she knew more than she was letting on, but regardless of how much I pried, she never told me what it was, and to this day, I still wonder. This was around 6 years ago. My buddies and I had a little tradition during our senior year of high school where we'd stay out all night, skating and exploring all kinds of spooky areas. This was before any of us had a car, so everything was traveled by foot. On one night in particular, we had ventured out over an hour from our usual exploration areas, and we came across a heavily wooded area that we hadn't been through before. The time had to have been around 2 or 3 in the morning, and just looking into those woods gave me an incredible feeling of unease that I had never felt before. My buddies were determined to go through it, but I decided against it, and instead told my friends that I would just skate or walk around and meet them at the gas station on the other side. It took me about 30 minutes to skate around the entire area. I waited at the exit of the woods for about 15 minutes before crossing the 4-lane street that led to the gas station. I asked the clerk if 3 guys had come in, and he tells me no, so I head back out and wait in front. 10 more minutes pass, and finally I hear heavy footsteps moving quickly from behind the gas station's main building. Next thing I know, I see all 3 of my buddies, sweaty, out of breath, and looking like they witnessed something terrible. We head into the gas station and sit at the small seating area. They then go on to tell me that somewhere halfway into the woods they heard strange noises behind them, and when they turned around to look, expecting to see an animal, they saw a tall, white figure with red eyes staring at them. They said they freaked out and just took off. As they neared the end of the woods, they could hear the leaves and branches rustling, as if the thing were chasing them. They kept running until they crossed the road separating the woods from the gas station, and once they were at the back of the gas station, they looked back and could see the figure just standing at the edge of the woods, unmoving. The way they described it was that it was only vaguely shaped like a human, more like a Sasquatch or Bigfoot type creature, but it was all white in color and just had these red, piercing eyes. Honestly, I had never seen anybody so distressed the way that my friends were that night. They genuinely seemed terrified, and that night, was one of the last times they ever wanted to all stay out at night. I think about this a lot, even to this day. On our way home from a camping trip, my family stopped by the Oak Springs Trilobite site to fossil hunt. If you don't know the southeastern Nevada desert, the attractions are low to moderately traveled, and you will often be one of the only visitors. This site in particular was empty, and we were the only people there. A quarter-mile trail leads you to a shale deposit where you can sift through for fossils. Shortly after starting out, I heard a man call out conversationally, not really shouting, but talking loudly enough to communicate with somebody a distance away. I was facing west on a south-facing slope, and he sounded like he was down and to the left, closer to me than to the highway. I paused and took a look around. There was no dust or engine noises from OHVs, no crunching of footsteps, nothing. There were flies buzzing about, and I decided that maybe a bug had buzzed in my ear and I had mistook it. A minute later, I heard another man call out, this time up the slope to my right. Probably another bug, I thought. Sounds can get funky in rocky canyons, so no big deal. We came upon the site, dug around for 30 minutes. It was too hot to stay any longer, and found a few unimpressive specimens and headed back for the truck. At this point, I had forgotten all about the voices. Driving away, I asked my husband, "What did you think? Pretty cool?" I'm the rock hound and never know if he's enjoying my hobby as much as I am. He replied, "Sure, it was actually pretty cool." Pause. But I kept hearing these voices and I couldn't tell where they were coming from. He had a face shield up over his ears at the time, making it unlikely that a bug could have buzzed in there. He said he was hearing them on the way back to the truck, and heard them calling out at least 3 times. Caliente is nearby and Pioche a ways further, and both towns have histories dating back to ye old mining days and Mormon frontiering. There are a lot of railroads, gunfighting, native raid stories, some weird Warren Jeffs type stuff, not to mention Area 51 being sort of relatively nearby. Now, we are atheists and skeptics. We don't believe in ghost stories, and neither of us have ever had a paranormal experience. But this one had us scratching our heads. In addition, my computer has frozen twice trying to post this, and now I'm trying on my phone. It genuinely feels like something doesn't want us talking about it. My old roommate moved to California this weekend, and some friends and I drove over to help her move in and check out the new place. I left a lot later than everyone else, so I ended up driving alone. I live in Arizona, so the drive is only about 6 hours from where I live. When I was driving there, I didn't see anything strange, other than a lady walking her dog in nothing but her underwear when I was filling up at a gas station that was basically in the middle of nowhere. Not pertinent to the story, I just thought it was strange. Certainly I hadn't seen anything paranormal. Anyway, I got to my friends at about midnight. Like I said, I left really late. I only stayed for a day and left the next night. Before I left, I told my friend I would take her back with me, since we live fairly close to each other. When we left, we took a different route than when I came, but we were still driving through essentially the middle of nowhere. When I was heading there, I took the Interstate 10. Coming back, I took the Interstate 8. If you aren't aware of the area, there are a few things you should know. Interstate 8 is basically on the border of Mexico, and driving from probably anywhere to Arizona, if you could imagine, is all rock and desert terrain. It was about 9 or 9:30, and I don't remember if I was still in California or Arizona at the time, but I think it was Arizona. It probably doesn't matter too much. Anyway, as we were driving down this road, we saw this really bright light that seemed to be on top of a rock. These roads aren't lit, so it was really out of the ordinary to see this light in the middle of the desert. At first, we thought it was a lit-up pole, but as we got closer, we got a better look. Mind you, I was going about 80 miles per hour, so I was driving pretty fast. But when we got close enough to see it, I swear by all things holy, it was a man. This thing, whatever it was, had a head, arms, a body, and legs, and it was glowing, like its whole body was made of light. I thought I was driving too fast because I wanted to keep an eye on the road, so I only got like a half glance of it. But my friend looked at me and asked if I saw it too. "You saw a man, right?" she said. I nodded. The rest of our drive was in silence. We haven't talked about it since, but I can't help thinking I saw something I shouldn't have. Maybe I'm just paranoid and it was the trick of an eye, in both of our eyes, I guess, or something like that. But I'm just curious to know if anyone else has seen the glowing man. Since my friend lives in California now, I'm planning on taking another trip there soon. I don't know if I want to see it again or not, but I'll let you know if I do. Tonight, my sister, brother-in-law, 2 friends, and I all piled into my truck and we headed out to a desert area near an old Cal Portland concrete factory. About a half hour into drifting, kicking up dust and messing around, everyone gets the chills, and my anxiety starts to flare up a bit. We brush it off as the temperature difference and keep going. 10 minutes later, we come around a corner, and my sister says, "Please tell me you guys just saw that woman." We respond, "What woman?" She says, "We just passed a woman standing on the side of the road wearing a pink shirt. She had blonde hair and it was covering her face and she looked dead." I honestly thought she was messing with me, so we turn around and go to the spot that she saw her. No woman. Brother-in-law and I get out with flashlights and look around. Still no woman. I tell my sister she's seeing things, but she insists that she saw this woman. So I decide to check my dashcam footage. Sure enough, there was a woman. She was crossing the road, it looks like, and then she just vanishes into thin air. My camera is super low quality and it was very dark, but when you go through the photos, the frame by frame, it's clear what we saw. My brother-in-law and I canvassed a 2-mile square radius on foot with flashlights, calling out to this woman because we legitimately thought there was someone lost in the desert. The entire time we kept feeling and hearing things all around us. Some information to note is that this was right next to an extremely murky pond. There is a possibility that a body could be hidden in that pond. I plan on going back tomorrow to photograph the area. I've left video evidence, images, and a frame-by-frame GIF below. This happened in March of 2011, near my house in a small town about an hour north of Indianapolis, Indiana. I was in the 8th grade at the time, and it was during my spring break. That year, instead of sunshine and warm weather for spring break, there was a snowstorm, probably around 8 inches or so of snow. My 2 friends, my 2 younger brothers, and I decided to make the best of it and just go play in the snow for the day. There was a woods near my house, not a huge one, but big enough to hike around in for a few hours, so we decided to do just that. About an hour into the hike, we stumbled on what looked like an old well, a stone circle about 10 feet in diameter, about 4 feet high off the ground, and partially filled with foul-smelling, half-frozen water. We threw a few rocks into it and stuck long tree branches to try to figure out how deep it was. We tried with a branch that was at least 20 feet long, but we were never able to hit the bottom, so it was pretty deep. Now, the well by itself wasn't really creepy or anything, but how old it looked and the way it was just stuck out in the middle of the woods was a little unnerving. It didn't seem to be attached to any property. The part that really terrified us came about 20 minutes after discovering the well. We had decided that we were done messing around with the well and had just started to continue on into the woods when we all heard something that made us freeze dead in our tracks with fear. Echoing through the woods came a loud, shrieking laugh. It was high-pitched, a grating voice that was still very loud despite seeming that it came from far away. We all just froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. This was not a scream, such as from a bobcat or a fox. It was a human laugh, like everything you've ever seen or heard in a horror movie. The laugh came again, this time distinctly closer to us, but still not in our immediate vicinity. At that moment, without any of us saying a word, we all bolted back the way we came, away from the sound, in the direction of my house. We didn't stop running for what seemed like an eternity, and we eventually made it back to my house with any more incident. None of us had a clue as to what we'd just heard, and none of us were ever brave enough to go back out there and figure it out. I have no idea what that laugh was. All of us have more than enough experience in the middle of nowhere in the woods to know what animals sound like, and that many of them can sound like humans. But this was a straight up laugh, and I will never understand what we heard. This happened a long time ago. I was 12 and in my grandparents' village. We had a cow and an ox. Usually, the son of the bull, usually just one, took all the cattle to graze, and at night he would take them back. Cows know where to go when they're going home. My grandpa had a male ox, and since my father was an adult and he wasn't there, I took the responsibility. Basically, my job was to go around the village with the ox trailing after me, calling the people to open their doors. Our ox would grunt to call the herd, and all the females came out. From then on, I had to take them to a clearing up the mountain, and later take them to the river. It was easy. The animals already knew where they were going. They were calm, and our bull was a gentle giant. All I did was ride him, and have a thin rope on his horns. If any of the females wandered off, all I did was call, or in a very rare occasion, poke her with a dull stick in the right direction. My grandpa said that if I ever saw a wolf, a boar, or a fox, I should stay on the ox. Not many animals dare to go near an ox herd. There is a dark part of the forest where it is very quiet, and even the bravest hunters won't go there. It is slippery and dangerous. They said that even the deer and the boar dare not go there. I was forbidden to go there, and honestly, I never wanted to. It was an early morning, and everything seemed fine. I was on the ox going up the mountain. I was glad that he let me because it was a hard trek up. I saw that one of the females was wandering off. I followed her and left our ox and the dogs to guide the herd. She went into the forest. I ran to her and got on tying the rope on her horns. I tried steering her away, but she continued. She went into the dark part and stopped. I didn't want to go get off in case she ran back and left me there, but I heard a crunch and turned. A very old man was walking toward us. He looked frail, with dirty clothes and a long beard. I was so scared, so I laid on the ox, clinging to her, not wanting to fall if she ran. Oxen aren't like bulls. They don't jump back and kick when they're scared. They either attack with their horns and trample, or they run. I was ready to hold on no matter what she chose. Our oxen don't take kindly to strangers. Before I took them out, I had to go to every house and have the ox owner introduce me to the animal. That way, they saw that their owner trusts me, and their herd leader, which is our ox, trusts me as well. I knew she would either attack or bolt, but she just stood there. The stranger came to us and petted her on her head, whispering something I didn't understand. He looked at me. His eyes were completely white. Then, he just turned around and left, disappearing into the trees. Suddenly the female grunted as if she had just woken up, the same way our male does every morning, and bolted the way we came from. We found the herd. I quickly got on our ox and yelled water. He knew that command and went down toward the river. There were houses there, and it was closer than home. I barged into one of the houses and tried my very best to explain what had happened. The couple there stayed with me and sent their daughter to call my grandpa. I couldn't sleep for days, remembering those white eyes. My grandparents didn't let me out of the house, and I wasn't allowed near the street. Later, I learned that they were protecting me from what's called a lesnik, a forest spirit which can take the form of a man, an owl, or a wolf. It hates when people go into his part of the woods, and it can kidnap you. I later learned that the ox which took me there had fallen ill and died. It sometimes stays in the trees as an owl, looking for the offender. For years, when I went to my grandparents, they wouldn't let me be alone. Not just outside, but inside too. Suffice it to say, I am never going into those woods again. This was back in June of 2016. My mom and dad had taken a trip out west. They had entered Muir Woods and were not in very far, no more than a half-mile. Of course, they're both admiring the huge trees, taking it all in, snapping photos and basking in the general magnificence of the towering woods. So Mom says that both her and Dad are standing in front of this one huge tree. There are tourists bobbing around close by, just feet away. As she's looking, she notices this movement coming from the bark. She said it was approximately at eye level, which would be 4.5 to 5 feet. My mom is short, 5 foot nothing. She said the next part all happens in the span of about 5 seconds. Movement in the bark directly in front of her. Then she sees it take the shape of a face. First the brows, then a nose, eyes, lips, and a chin. She says the face is protruding out of the trunk, about a foot tall, from chin to forehead. As the face is continuing to bulge, she lets out a small but involuntary gasp. And just like that, as if the face realized that it was being noticed, it shrunk back in, and the bark returned to normal. Not looking away from the tree, my mom said, "Ron, did you see—" And my father completes her sentence with, "The face in the tree, yes." Not a question, it was a statement. Another woman, who was a couple feet away, stepped up to where my parents were standing and said, "I saw it too," and then moved away. I don't know if the majority of the group was already moving out or if my father just began walking away on his own accord, but either way, they both left the tree. Mom said that she started to ask my dad about what he had seen to make sure it matched her own account. He was not comfortable discussing it right then and told her to hush, that people would hear them and that those people would think they were crazy. So they left it alone. But much later during the trip, he still doesn't want to discuss it. Now, even though my dad has had his fair share of wild experiences, and he will usually humor bizarre conversation, he's handled this whole situation like a total Hank Hill. Maybe since he can't fully understand it, he rebukes it? I don't know. He's always been particularly sensitive on the topic of the paranormal. He almost rejects it, but I know he believes in it enough that he's afraid of giving it power by acknowledging it. Either way, it was a profound experience for both of them. The pictures you're about to see came from a trail cam in Wisconsin. I've had these pictures for a few years and finally thought I would share them. These were captured on a couple of different motion-activated trail cams on the same night, and appear to show a ghostly girl carrying a bag of some sort. These pictures were taken by somebody that my dad used to work with, who sent them to my dad, who's then sent them to me. I have no reason to doubt the authenticity of the photos. According to my dad, this guy is a hunter, and he was using the cameras to see wildlife in the area. He was so freaked out by these pictures and other strange occurrences in his house that he wanted to sell his property and leave the area. I did notice that one of the pictures is dated 2014, and the other is dated 2015. I can't make out the date on the third picture, since it's a picture of a guy's computer and the date is cut off. I still have the email from when my dad sent me the pictures, and I received them in 2014, so the picture dated 2015 is showing the wrong date. I'm not sure what to make of that error, but I still think the three pictures together show some pretty convincing evidence of a ghost. The other interesting thing about these pictures is that apparently there was an ATV accident in these woods and a young woman was killed. The guy living on the property who captured these pictures showed them to a friend who was one of the EMTs at the scene of the accident, and he thought the girl in the pictures was dressed similarly to the girl who had died in the accident. I have absolutely no idea when this accident occurred or the specifics of the location. I've tried to research it, but I can't find anything. Even so, the girl in these pictures is a mystery. I've had many of my own paranormal experiences near this area, in small town, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, so I definitely believe these pictures could be showing a ghost, but I'm not 100% convinced. I'd like to hear other people's opinions on this. But either way, I think it's pretty evident that we captured something paranormal, ghost girl or not. I don't know if you would consider parallel universes to be paranormal, but I'll tell you the story anyway. I was in Tennessee to see my cousin. My family and I were going down the countryside, enjoying the view, when we came upon this tunnel. It could only fit one car, and it was unbelievably dark. We went inside the tunnel, and nothing out of the ordinary happened, except that this tunnel was in the middle of nowhere, and it was so dark inside. We told my cousin about this tunnel, so he got on his phone and typed in the coordinates of where the tunnel was said to be. He looked at us with a pale face, and we asked him what was wrong. He said, "There's no tunnel at that location." We all sat there in shock, looking dumbfounded. We thought maybe we'd gotten the coordinates wrong, so we went back to the area right where the tunnel had been, and it wasn't there. I don't know if we slipped through some dimensional portal or if it was just a ghost tunnel in the middle of nowhere. Either way, it was incredibly freaky. A while back, I went to the Rockies with my then boyfriend. We were hiking pretty far up there when we came across what looked like a small silo. The door on it had a padlock, but it was unlocked. I mean, not just unlocked, but it had been busted off. We were curious as to what could be inside of it, because it was strange that we would have come upon anything at all. We weren't on a trail, and we were way up there. My boyfriend at the time opened it up, and inside was what looked like a torture chamber. Like full-on chair with restraints and chains coming from the ceiling. There was a trap door on the floor, and there was no way we were opening it. We hiked right back to our car and left. I still feel creeped out just thinking about it. I work at a summer camp, taking kids on canoe trips for a few days at national parks. One night, after setting up camp and quenching the fire, I was doing a last check of the campsite. I looked at the lake and saw this lone man paddling a canoe. I thought it was pretty strange, but it's not out of the ordinary. The only weird thing was that he was alone. He waved, so being the polite Canadian that I am, I waved back. Went to bed in the staff tent. Everything was normal. I had a little bit of trouble sleeping that night, so I decided to go stargazing because that usually calms me down. I exit the tent and I see this man on our campsite looking through tarps and bags. For what? I don't know. Maybe drugs, maybe food, but that's not important. This stranger is by the campers that I am responsible for. We make eye contact and this guy stands up. He is super tall and I am quite short, so I quickly grab the first thing I can think of, a can of bear spray. This stuff is meant to kill almost a charging bear, so I hold it ready to spray and tell him to get off my campsite. We don't really speak, just "Oh, I didn't see you guys," when he's leaving. I immediately wake up the other staff and we all make sure he leaves. We used our satellite phone to call park rangers with our position, give the guys characteristics and tell them the story. Without a doubt, the scariest moment I've had on the job. I've learned not to fear animals, not to fear the paranormal. As for the most part, animals are predictable, dumb, and not malicious, and the paranormal, you usually get out alive. But people, on the other hand, the scariest and most dangerous thing to encounter out in the wilderness is another human. So, we're at this camper near the Dover Lights in Arkansas. It's not the fanciest campsite, but we managed to find this guy that spends a lot of time out there, as much as legally allowed, while also working and apparently making a lot of cash, so he just vacations in the woods for half the year. The guy offers to let my friend watch the place while he goes to visit his son. My friend automatically invites me, and some other people, to come and hang out, and we spend a few days there, drinking, smoking, fishing, messing around. All in all, pretty okay, until my female friend gets super drunk and barges outside in the middle of the night, buck naked, to eat beans by the handful out of a cold pot. As someone who admires cleanliness, I follow her out and try to make sure she doesn't hurt herself while everyone else just laughs. So there she is, covered in beans, and I'm trying to convince her to settle down and clean herself off with a towel, when suddenly her head shoots up like a deer in headlights. She just glares at the trees around us. We were completely alone, and it's pitch black in the middle of nowhere. Then she literally starts growling and sprints into the woods. I had no idea what to do. I'd completely lost sight of her, and so she's naked in the woods by herself. A few failed attempts to call out to her, and I do the stupidest thing I could have done by following her. About 5 meters into complete darkness, I look down and see a faint light from someone's phone. Picking it up, I see it's in camera mode, and there are pictures of us, very recent pictures, all in creepy night vision mode, with some looking like they were taken from the window of the camper. And the last one is of my friend running directly toward the camera. Realizing what had happened, I delete the pictures and drop the phone on a rock, crushing the screen with my foot. I'm still unable to find her and freaking out. I double back to the camper for help, only to find her, still very drunk, in a lawn chair, naked. Carrying her back inside, I let her boyfriend towel her off, and they both pass out. I never told them what really happened, and she didn't remember in the morning, but I did lock the door and wake up every hour just to keep an eye on things. In hindsight, I should have kept that phone. I should have turned it into someone, but when you're afraid, you do stupid things. I'm just glad we all got out alive. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana-Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology, and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure that there aren't any contaminants. I thought that sounded like fun, and I wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out. The first day and night were amazing. Beautiful scenery, amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area, and I wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "Hey, you want to see something weird?" Of course I did, so I said yes. She led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path that we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It's one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to. But that kills the batteries quickly. So I do what she says, and out in the middle of nowhere, there's a huge coil of wire just sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally, I decide to follow the thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees, then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks, and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood plastic top thing. No chair, no building, No foundation, no nada. Just this outlet and this desk in the middle of the woods. I'm staring, confused, at what this thing's doing here, when my cousin takes out the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. And wouldn't you know, that thing lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we had no road access, no buildings for many miles, no other people around. And yet there it was, a live outlet. Weird as heck. No spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone powered desk in the middle of the woods. I wish I'd taken a picture of it, but frankly, I was just stunned. I've only ever lived in one place my whole life. I lived with my family up on a mountain in rural Alabama. Like, really rural. Around our house, you could walk 2 or 3 miles in any direction and not find a single sign of civilization except for the road leading up to our house. Just trees, leaves, and pine straw. So, just about 3-mile radius of private woodland. Anyway, one night when I was probably about 15 or 16, I had a girl over at my house who I desperately wanted to impress. So, I decided it would be cool to go walk out to my favorite spot in the woods. In hindsight, I know I shouldn't have done it, but the spot was my ace in the hole, alright? It was super romantic. Fireflies and the sound of a small stream, I mean the whole shebang. She seemed tentative at first because she was smart, but ultimately she caved to the thought of the adventure. So we start walking down the path I had cut out. I've got my lantern because I couldn't find the flashlight, so I couldn't really see too far out in front of me, but it was enough to see the path. So it's about 10 or 15 minute walk, and about halfway through, there's this kind of distant, weird buzzing sound. It was hardly loud enough to interrupt our conversation, but it was definitely there whenever there was a break in talking. At first, I really didn't think much of it. The woods can be a really loud place at night with all of the bugs, and it was getting to be spring, so I pretty much ignored it. Then, after a bit of walking, it was definitely getting to be a more and more pronounced buzzing. Eventually, my friend asked me if I heard it too, and after I confirmed that I did, she was adamant about turning around and going back. I agreed, just to make her comfortable, but as we were going back, the noise just kept getting louder. And eventually, as we were almost back, it was clear that this sound was not a buzz at all. It was the sound of someone playing a harmonica, and it had been gaining on us in the dark the whole way. By the end of it, we were running pretty much full speed out of the woods, across the yard, and straight into the house. We went up to one side of the house, to the windows facing the yard, hit the light, and cracked the windowsill to listen. It was still out there, playing its harmonica, and we listened to it pass the house and fade into the pines. By far the most surreal and horrifying experience of my life. Probably my most cherished memory too, though, because that girl ended up being the one that got away. Go figure. I was in Syria on a visit from Australia back in the late 90s. I was out walking around in kind of the middle of nowhere, hiking in the deep woods. I saw 2 dogs in the distance, about 30 meters away, lit up by a bright moon. They had faces that looked human. I seriously froze. They walked up to about 10 meters away from me, and I could see it more clearly. They were dogs with human faces. One of them growled, so I fired off a round and they ran away. I immediately headed back home, looking over my shoulder the whole way. I told my aunt what I had seen. I was still freaked out, and I expected them to be concerned, but the entire house erupted in laughter. Apparently, it was some local ghost story. Everyone had an encounter with them at one stage or another. I was not amused. I usually go on the annual hunting trip with my dad and his hunting buddy, but this trip I missed. Still, even though it's not my story, it's one worth telling. My dad and his hunting buddy were in a remote section of southeastern Wyoming, hunting for elk. Like any good elk hunter, they were up at 3:30 in the morning to stake out their spot and watch the herd patterns before daylight. As they were driving up to the spot, a figure appeared in their headlights, and by their silhouette, it wasn't a hunter. What was a person doing walking down the road in complete darkness with no hunting gear? My dad was driving, so he slowed to a crawl in his truck, and his buddy prepared his sidearm, just in case. This had foul play written all over it. When they could finally distinguish the figure in the headlights, they saw that it was a girl in a tank top and underwear, wearing no shoes. They stopped and verbally checked her status out the window, as there could easily have been somebody staked out in the sagebrush, ready to ambush. When it was clear that she was severely hypothermic and bleeding from her feet, they got out and let her in the truck cab. From there, it had to have been a terrifying experience for that girl. I sure wouldn't want two middle-aged rednecks picking me up 40 miles away from any town. They cranked up the heat full blast and drove her to a nearby country gas station where they knew everybody. They were regular customers and friends with the owner and his wife, who was a retired nurse. When the girl could finally articulate her words, she told him a horrifying story. She and her boyfriend drove out there to drink and get busy. When she started having a seizure during sex, he lost his temper, grabbed her shoes, and threw them into the sage. When she got out of his car to find them, he peeled off, leaving her in near-freezing temperatures and nothing but her skivvies. She estimated she walked about 4 miles on a dirt road, barefoot, before my dad and his friend found her. It's a darn good thing that hunters start early, because she easily could have died. This is the only experience I have ever had like this. Nothing else has come close. Some friends and I, 5 of us in all, were driving around some rural backroads waiting for a friend to arrive to his girlfriend's house. We were just kind of wasting time, cruising down some dirt roads around 20 miles an hour, talking. My friend, who's driving, suddenly slams on his brakes, and I, in the passenger seat, looked up. In front of us, there was this thing. I had never seen anything like it before. We stopped the car and watched as this creature, which didn't have a perceivable head, moved slowly across the road about 15 feet in front of us. It was creepy, to say the least. It was approximately 4 feet tall, and we could see its joints moving as it walked slowly with a gait similar to a giraffe. It had very skinny, long legs. Its body was about 1.5 feet round. If it had hair, it was pretty short, but the thing was brown. We were all screaming, "What the heck is that?" We could not see any perceivable head, and it was walking perpendicular to us. So if it had one, we should have seen it. We watched as it slowly walked through these people's yard, behind their house, and on into the darkness. Needless to say, we were freaking out about it. When we got to my friend's house, we all drew pictures of it separately and showed each other at the same time when we were done, to verify that we all saw what we saw. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen, and I have not found any satisfactory explanation to this day, 20 years later. Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed those stories. I don't believe I've heard any of those before, so they were all new to me. And definitely freaky. I love middle of nowhere stories, or anywhere where somebody is in a desolate situation. I think it just adds to the creep factor. For those of you who are active on the community tab on my channel, I have looked at all of the poll data that from the last day or so, and it seems like most of you are fine with Night Marathon being the way it was originally planned. So there will be one true story video, just one true story, one video of true stories, and then one original short story, which means I wrote it. So one of the things that I wrote, but I'm not sure if I'm going to still stick with one theme per day, because some of them I don't have enough stories to fill an entire day. So some of them might just have to be like general paranormal days, but that's fine. But I do have themes for every day, and so if I can find enough stories between now and a couple weeks from now, when everything has to be sort of scheduled and up, then I will stick with that theme. But on days where the theme that I had planned isn't viable to have a whole video, then I'll just make it a general paranormal day. So that should be fine. Thank you guys for participating in the polls. I know it seems like I'm overthinking things, but I just like data because, like I mentioned, I have an art channel that I don't really know what to do with. I had one of two options for that channel. I could either, if you guys were like, yes, give us all the fiction, and you guys really wanted fiction stories, then I would have put my fiction here, and then I would have made my art channel like a tutorial channel. If you guys wanted mostly true stories, I would put my fiction on my art channel and make it an illustration channel, and more of like a storytelling channel. So I think that's what I'll do, since most of you are more interested in the true stories. Yeah, so I will probably continue to do a couple of, like, if I find a really good creepypasta, or if there's just one of my own stories that I want to share here, or something like that, I'll do that from time to time, because it seems like most of you were okay with that. But as far as most of my original work, so the stories that I write, they're not creepypastas or like no sleep, like I meant like horror stories, like short stories that you would find in a book, that kind of style. I'll put that over on my art channel, so I have to completely redo my art channel. So I will put a link up when I've kind of rebranded it and focused it a little bit. And when I have some more content up there, I will go ahead and post that here for you guys, so that if you do want both, you can still